In this episode of Talking Tottenham Tactics, we're going to rearrange the deck chairs on this Titanic of a supertanker as the icebergs rip up the hulls. We're familiar with the refrain that there's only one stat that matters, and that's the scoreline. While that may be true, football is a multi-billion-dollar business and there is no stone left unturned as long as money is involved. Even if you win, there has to be some introspection and analysis of what can be improved on, and that's a combination of using your eyes, video analysis, and stats. Use of data in football came to prominence in USA '94 when the USA team used data to figure out Colombia's Wilson Perez was attacking on the right flank but failing to track back. The USA capitalized on that in the second half to score the second goal, giving them a 2-0 lead. Data has become an important part of the game, influencing scouting, recruitment, game analysis, performance tracking, and sports science. So what are expected goals anyway? XG is a basic way of quantifying shots to approximate the team's shots and by proxy, chance creation and attacking performance. It calculates the probability of scoring based on a shot's distance and angle from goal, what body part was used, and how the chance was created. So why do we care about expected goals? There needs to be a way to quantify performances across a season in an objective way. We're all familiar with games where a team played well and deserved the win, but either luck or an extremely good performance by a goalkeeper or informed striker made the big difference. An example of this is Kane and Son were freaks of nature that overperformed their XG throughout their career, meaning that they had exceptional finishing and Spurs was able to manage even when our chance creation was meagre and mediocre. Having lost them and replaced them with mere mortal strikers, we needed to improve our chance creation dramatically to make up for this, because Richarlison and Solanke are going to need more chances to score the same amount of goals. So what can XG not achieve, or what's it not designed to do? Basic XG models do not account for the individual skill of the player. This means a chance that falls to a player in the box in the same position will be scored exactly the same, whether the shooter is Kane or Sissoko. This fails to account for defensive pressure and intricacies like whether the player is off balance, the ball is slightly behind him, or if his shirt is being pulled. It doesn't evaluate chance creation. Advanced models may only take the assist into account, but not the passes before that. What it doesn't account for as well is game state, such as luck, the scoreline, how much time is left, the momentum of the game, whether it's just after a red card or the players and the fans are outraged from a refereeing blunder. Because of this, XG isn't completely reliable enough to be used to assess single games. It evens out over the course of a season, but there are too many variables that can occur in a single game which are not considered by XG models, which can lead to large variances. Now let's decipher Frank's press conferences. A big source of frustration fans have felt when watching Frank's press conferences stem from perceived gaslighting and his apparent disconnection with reality. There are examples such as calling the goalless draw with Brentford a very strong defensive performance, calling the first half of the 1-1 draw against Wolves good, and thinking the overall performance of the 3-2 loss against Bournemouth was good amidst the chaos of Cupgate. Frank seems to fixate on certain metrics when he makes comments like positive performance or we are getting closer. I've run some analysis on his post-match responses against underlying data to see what he's talking about when he makes those claims. What is going on in Frank's interviews, and what statistics is he referring to when he talks about good performance? It could be our expected goals being higher than the opponent's expected goals. Our XG is called XG and the opponent's XG is called XGA, or expected goals allowed. Our XGA being low, meaning that we denied the opponent good goal scoring opportunities. There are also other flavors of XG to get a more granular look at performance in this statistic in specific phases of play, such as non-penalty XG, open play XG, and set-piece XG. Field tilt is expressed as a percentage and it counts actions like passes, carries into the attacking third of the pitch, and ignores harmless possession in our own half or midfield. Its limitation is that it cannot measure whether these actions created meaningful chances. You can have 90% field tilt, but if you only play sideways and backwards everywhere we go, or you cross only into the box for an eerily dominant centre-back to clear, you're not really doing anything productive with the ball. This is why it's important to take into account statistics like expected threat in conjunction with field tilt to account for what's being done with that possession. Defense splitting passes into the box or a successful dribble past a defender will score well for XT, but a sideways or backwards pass will score low. Expected points. These take into account the total match XG and XG allowed, then runs thousands of match simulations to get probabilistic outcomes. These results are calculated to form the expected points you would have received on those thousands of match simulations. Points minus expected points is a formula used to calculate a team's actual points scored against their expected points. So there are defensive statistics like high recoveries, which counts winning possession in the opponent's final third. Passes per defensive action counts the number of passes an opponent makes in the 60% of the field from their goal before we make a defensive action like pressuring, tackling, intercepting or fouling. A lower number is better and indicates an intense high press. Our best in the league was 6.5 in the 3-2 loss against Bournemouth, and our worst was 27.81 in the 1-0 win against Crystal Palace. On-ball pressure refers to tackles, interceptions, fouls and pressures. Off-ball pressures refers to marking, covering and anticipating. This could be blocking passing lanes with positioning, moving to cover space if your teammate is beaten, any action that is defensive that doesn't directly defend the ball carrier. Now for the 4-1 game against Arsenal, you can see that Frank is upfront about our failings. He rightly points out the failure to press Arsenal. Our on-ball pressure score is 8, our lowest of the season, and with 108 being our average for the season. He also talks about duels, with the stat showing Arsenal won 54.2% of all duels, as well as the most successful tackles, 16 against 12, and a higher tackle success rate of 69.6 versus 57.1. When he talks about Arsenal playing it around us, it's a recognition of how we failed to stop Arsenal in build-up play. We had only one high recovery all game, with our season average being 5. Arsenal used this to create 11 chances to our 3, 27 touches in the box to our 4. And when we did have the ball, we also did little with it. Our game control score was 11, our second worst of the season, with our average being 89, and our worst XG of the season, 0.06, a monumentally meek display. Upon running analysis of Frank's post-match interviews, he's most honest when he talks about the best wins and worst defeats, probably because it's worth celebrating and talking about what worked well for the wins. And with the losses, there's no way to hide and lie that we played well when it's clear to everyone that the performance was bad. So in those interviews, he's candid and honest about our faults. In the 2-1 loss to Leeds, his answers were a bit more vague. He talks about, intangibles like mentality, character, cohesion and togetherness, and mentions something about looking solid defensively. The numbers don't bear this out. The XG allowed of 2.44 is one of the worst defensive performances of the season. The expected goal difference is minus 1.69, with our XG being 0.75, despite scoring 2 goals. Points minus expected points is an indicator which calculates the number of points scored against the number of points the underlying performance quote-unquote deserves. In this game, we scored 2.58 more points than we deserve, indicating our performance deserved the loss and we somehow managed to win. Let's look more broadly at the points minus expected points trend over the course of the season. In that column, you can see, for example, in the Leeds game, our underlying performance deserved a loss, but we managed to win and outperform our expected points by 2.58. In the cumulative points against expected points column, it tracks on a game-by-game basis how much we overperformed our expected points. The conclusion from the first 9 games is that we overperformed our expected points by 4.89, indicating we gained almost 5 points more than our performance deserved. Over the next 8 games, our fortunes change and we start underperforming our expected points. Our initial cumulative expected points overperformance of almost 5 basically drops to 0.44 in the space of the next 8 games. This is sentiment analysis on every post-match press conference in the league thus far. The cells highlighted in green are games where Frank's comments and use of data match the reality of the game, or the underlying data, and the cells highlighted in yellow are the games in which he either makes claims that are unsupported by the underlying data, or omits mentioning aspects of the performance where the underlying data paints an ugly picture. When we get to the latter part of the season, Frank omits some negative underlying data from his post-match comments, where he claims an overall good performance against Liverpool with a field tilt of 32.27%, second worst after our 4-1 loss to Arsenal, and possession of 34.9%, which is our worst of the season. For example, the 2-1 loss at West Ham was the pivotal result that turned most people against Frank, and he called it a positive performance, and that we were the closest to win it, but omitted the fact that we allowed West Ham set-piece XG of 1.79 and an overall XG of 3.29. To be fair to Frank, the injuries have drastically affected his ability to play his favourite pattern of play, which is to cross to the striker from the right flank for a shot on goal. With Kudus and Richarlison, we averaged 1.37 points per game and 1.52 xG per game for the 19 games they were both available. However, after Kudus' injury, our points per game dropped to 0.5, despite maintaining our crossing volume and increasing our xG. After Richarlison also gets injured, our crosses per game decreased dramatically as our target man no longer exists and we need to adapt to a different method of chance creation. However, our passes into the final third also decreased, indicating that we got worse at penetrating defenses. Speaking of injuries, it was very clear in January that the squad was in dire need of reinforcements, and yet the window closed with only Conor Gallagher signed as a viable contender for the first team. We've all heard David Pleat's opinion about the use of data for scouting, but one of the main constraints is the time and effort required to scout players in person. We understand that you need to use your eyes, but at the same time, you can't travel everywhere to see everyone, so you do need to be able to narrow it down in some way. The time commitment to watch a player's games is high, and there has to be a way to narrow down the candidates worth that time investment. Another good reason to use data is to map the attributes and capabilities of your existing squad and look for specific areas which are lacking. If I told you our midfielders lack the ability to make key passes, progressive passes and forward passes, would you agree with that based on the eye test? To find reinforcements which improve deficiencies, that allows us to build a list of players which would complement our existing squad based on them providing attributes and capabilities which are lacking. You can see from this list that Adam Wharton is far from the only choice available, and by having a list of players we can approach in parallel, we can ensure we do not repeat the mistakes of the summer window by hyperfixating on Ezra and Morgan Gibbs-White, to the point that the window closes without us having secured any signings whatsoever. When sorting by passes into final third, you can see a list of candidates. Ignoring the ones that are unlikely to come to Spurs, you can see a few which are viable. Let's sort the list again with through balls, and resort again with progressive passes, and again with key passes. You might observe that some names float to the top in multiple categories like Elliot Anderson, Angelo Stiller, David Ruam, Nicolas Pez and Valentin Bako. While this is simplistic, it's one way to narrow down the list of the vast array of possibilities into a short list of players to spend more time doing a more in-depth study of. At that point, you can start drilling down more and watching tape of them before deciding whether or not to scout them in person. I think it's fair to say when we signed Van der Ven from Wolfsburg, a number of fans thought he was just the cheaper alternative to Edmund Tapsoba. However, his underlying numbers, especially his pace and progressive carries, showed that there was a player there, with a question mark around his aerial duel capabilities. Come the summer window, we need our director of football in place, signing players for the club, not for a specific manager. This list of progressive passes is just a starting point, and whether these options even consider us would depend a lot on whether we have Champions League or European football of any kind to offer, before we even consider transfer fees and wages. Given that it's a World Cup year, we should be negotiating pre-contracts now, because players can play really well in the World Cup and increase their value and competition for their signature, while balancing against the risk of them getting injured due to the grueling schedule. As you can see from this diagram, this maps players by their shot creating actions and progressive passes. I've also set the circle of the number of progressive passes they receive. There are some elite players in elite teams there, but plenty of players with the right age profile like Valentin Bako, Elliot Anderson, Nicola Fangioli, and the Barantesia, who come from clubs like Strasbourg, Nottingham Forest, Fiorentina and Real Sociedad, where coming to Spurs even without European football would still be an attractive enough proposition.